But first, I wanted to introduce Chris Eichelson from 360 SOC, the founder and CEO. We've been working with him for many years to come up with innovative and effective cybersecurity solutions for our clients. And today he's going to talk about bridging the gap, helping align cybersecurity needs with the executive vision of the business. Chris?
Thank you, Ryan. Well, first off, thank you everybody for coming to my session today. This topic ends up being a little bit close to home. I was actually out there doing a road tour series this year, a Topgolf series this spring, and multiple times during the series of events, the CIOs, CTOs, and CISOs that were at the attendees at the events kept asking me the same question around, how do I make it easier to sell what I'm doing inside the IT and security department? How do I make that easier when delivering that to the executive suite, CEO, CFO? So today's topic is going to be on bridging that gap. First thing here that I want to talk about is understanding the perspective between the CIO, the CISO, the CTO, and actually the CEO, CFO. What's important? And I think that's one of the first things that we drop or we lose as a IT or security professional is we forget that the audience that we're speaking to potentially might not be as technical savvy as we are. They potentially might not necessarily understand the core of what we're trying to deliver to the organization. And on top of that, we're going to talk a little bit more about, how do we shift that conversation a bit? How do we make that a little bit easier? So the first thing I always like to bring up is changing the vocabulary is one of the most major things. You start talking about, what's important. You ask the CEO, CFO, they're interested in revenue and risk in most cases. A lot of people might bring compliance into that conversation. I think that compliance of the three would be the last in most of the CEOs and CFOs conversation that they're having internally. And I think that when we're selling internally and we recognize the fact that this is really a conversation of we have revenue and we also have what are we doing for the business, and is it actually shifting that risk profile for us? And addressing that into a point where the CEO or the CFO might be able to actually understand where you're coming from. There are two, in my opinion, there's two different types of CEOs out there that you might run into. Number one, we're starting to see a big shift of like CIOs, CTOs, that IT executive becoming a CEO. It's kind of like the next gen CEO, in my opinion. A CEO that's, backed by technology, driven by technology. Potentially that might only fit a technology-driven company, though. The other audience that you might have is solely as some people might reference it as kind of like a displaced audience. They understand that they're there, they understand the goal, but they really don't necessarily care if, the house is brown, white, or cream. They really want to understand the house, right? So talk a little bit about making that conversation a little bit easier. I think that one of the other things that's important is the alignment piece. I think a lot of CIOs or IT executives really struggle with the alignment. Why are we in the room? I was chatting with a gentleman this morning, and I think he referenced around, a lot of times they don't even get the seat at the table. And he referenced that, for himself, he wouldn't even take a position where he doesn't get a seat at that table reporting to somebody like a CEO. Therefore, being able to enable the business, getting out of those conversations around this potentially might be a rate center or, IT being a rate center, let's put it that way. Another thing that I think is important is if there is an ability to frame an ROI, I find that to be a great conversation. One of the challenges I see in my role and also, working with my team is that it is really hard to correlate ROI into the IT department unless it's delivered upon like a technology. A couple examples of that I'll talk about that I think are reasonable examples where a business was necessarily forced into applying, cybersecurity and IT controls in place in order to then sell their product. Now you can actually associate that with some type of an ROI. In most cases, though, I'm finding that this is going to be an increased cost, right? You're going into the conversation, and when you go into that conversation, you're going in already, in my opinion, and most folks, kind of almost on the edge, right? It's almost like when you were a kid and you were going to walk into your parents and you'd say, you always would wait for the perfect time. I want to catch mom or catch dad at the perfect time so I get the answer I want. I'm pretty confident that in a lot of IT and security departments today, a lot of the executives are waiting for the perfect time, right? I have my next meeting. I have my monthly meeting. I'll bring it up there. Well, if we're continually waiting for the next opportunity to bring it up, there's things that are going to come up in place that potentially might take a priority. So we have to be careful about not just being, it's not complacent, but not delaying projects, not delaying the ask because of our next type of scheduled meeting. That's what we were taught. Ever since you were probably old enough to talk, the natural instinct is, like I said, I want to wait for that perfect time to ask because I want to get the answer I want. Unfortunately, with cybersecurity and IT, this stuff's moving pretty fast. And in most cases, there's really no perfect time to ask. If you're asking for more money, does it really matter if you ask for more money today or for 3 weeks from now? Unless there's some type of big event that's going to happen in the company that would shift the conversation and force us into making that type of change, is it not that we shouldn't just back up, put together a plan, sit with other executives inside the organization, get somebody to support our initiative, and then go present that forward to the buying authority inside the organization to get the check cut? It sure makes a lot more sense than waiting for the perfect opportunity. Human instinct says, though, we should probably wait for the perfect opportunity because, again, you go back to it, since we were kids, everyone in this room would always wait for the perfect opportunity, right? I gotta wait for that perfect time. Well, guys, there's no perfect time here. The perfect time sucks if we get breached an hour later after we should have asked for that solution, right? We really needed those logs because we're in a ransomware situation, but we've been waiting to implement our SIM because I've been waiting to get the funding for it. Well, that just cost you 10 SIMs and a whole lot of other embarrassment, right? When I talk to a lot of the CEOs and CFOs that I work with, the one thing that we all have a common conversation around is not being up here. Never have to be up here in front of your customers explaining how you guys made a mistake, right? We didn't do something. We're now in the news. We breached 80 million customer records, every time you open your LinkedIn feed, you see the next company that's got breached and, your info's out there somewhere. The largest being the Social Security breach this year. I think it was like hundreds of millions, right? So pretty impactful. I talked a second ago about aligning internally. I was on a board this morning at a virtual conference, and this was actually one of the topics that we talked about is, if I have a board of 5 people or 6 people, there's got to be somebody on the board that I can relate to if I'm not also on the board, or maybe I am on the board and I need some other alignment inside of that board in order to help me achieve what I'm looking to achieve. And I think it's important because if you've ever been in a situation where you have been trying to present something forward and you've always gone in sales, we used to say you're always better going with 4 than you're going with 2, probably better with 6 than 2 as well. And the reason being is you have somebody to validate what you're talking about. And I have an example that comes up, and we'll reference his name as Bob. And Bob is a great IT and security professional. He's a CIO of a $4 or $5 billion bank. But Bob's number one problem in every executive conversation I'm in is he articulates way too much detail, right? He talks like he's playing the video game at the same time, right? He's telling examples of things that really don't matter instead of saying, look, I'm looking to do this, and this needs this in order to be accomplished. He's sitting there telling them that the hair on the horse is 2 inches long, the tail's eight feet long, the hoof is this big when it's really this big. And all of a sudden, you see the CEO start looking at his phone, or you start looking at him and doing other things because he's lost. He doesn't really care. All he cares is, when are you going to ask me for the horse? And is that horse going to win a race, or am I going to be like a, runner-up, right? What is this doing for us? And I think that's huge, because in that Bob scenario, he's the guy that you get on the phone with, and the first thing he does is he gives you his resume. I've been doing it for 35 years. I go back to frame relay. I do the whole thing. And a lot of people in the room probably laugh, because they're like, they've all sat in these conversations where it's like, we're not here to talk about the resume. We don't care about the resume. We hired you already. What we want to know is why we're here, what the goal is, and in a lot of times from a CEO spot, what's that cost, right? If I'm a rate center, and I was using this example earlier, I use it a lot on my demos and calls that when I talk to people. If I'm a rate center and I'm talking about security, and I make $1 million or $2 million off in profit off of a product, well, if it's going to cost me additionally because of some requirements, it's going to cost me 50 to 80% to now secure that and to check that box, yet I'm not going to get paid more for the service, does it make sense? For the last 10 years, every company in America buy insurance for that. We'll bet our odds that we have X in place and we can insure the difference. Well, insurance is becoming harder, right? You can't just insure everything anymore. They have so many small print in those documents that everything they're trying to do is get you out of it being a cyber incident and getting into some type of business problem, right? A process problem. Another thing I like to talk about too is when it comes to that conversation and kind of going back to the Bob factor, if you are that person, right, and a lot of us are, especially the legacy folks, like it's very common to jump down that hole. Have somebody there with you that knows business, because then they can interject and they can say, what Bob is really trying to say is that today versus yesterday, we're 100% more secure than we were. How did we get there? Well, it cost us $1 million. What's $1 million to a $4 billion company? I'm not even sure they consider that a rounding error. It's nothing. It's approach, it's asking, it's aligning, it's having the right people in the room. People that can validate what you're saying. But in order for people to validate what you're saying, you also got to be the best educator. You need to educate that audience of how you want that to go. That means that you got to carve out a little extra time. I know most of the executives I know, you're probably not getting that time even as a CIO or CTO during 8 to 5 hours. They're booked up. Grab a coffee, 7 a.m., catch a workout. Go talk to them. Bring in paint the picture, frame it. I always laugh because employees, right? I love employees, okay? And one of the things about employees are they do the best job. Nobody does a better job than an employee at painting the picture, okay? And the reason why I say this is this gets real good because every one of my employees, before they call out sick, paints the picture. I'm really starting to not feel good today. Or think about internet outage. Well, I just got a notice on my phone that some of the internet's going to go on out in the neighborhood. Is your internet out yet? I bet it will be in 30 minutes, though, closer to lunch, right? Painting the picture is key. And we find that, like, in the natural human instinct is really good at doing these small things. Painting the picture, waiting for the perfect timing. If we can paint the picture and we get the timing right, we got a really good chance of succeeding. Success potentially might happen. Everybody loves to talk about cost, the FUD factor, going in and saying, if we don't do this, we're going to get breached. We'll be in the news. You'll be on the podium. Sure. 99% of companies will never stand up on this stage. It's fact. Less than 1% will ever have a major breach. Major. We're talking about in the news. There's like 45 million companies in America. You guys see on LinkedIn a very small piece, or the new, or Google, whatever. I typically see most of mine in LinkedIn because it's like, you know, the alarm or the ambulance chasers all pop out as soon as there's a breach, right? Immediately they're posted, and it's like your second best threat intel source, LinkedIn. But I think it's really, really important, though, to be able to justify what inaction does equal. Going in and scaring your audience, it doesn't really work that well, right? Like, I'm scared every time I cross the street. Maybe I forgot to look left. I don't know. But it doesn't work very well. The human doesn't adapt to it very well. Salespeople love it. I hate salespeople for that reason. Why are we trying to scare the customer? That doesn't matter. They can read, right? They all know how to open the news. So we don't have to tell what's obvious. We need to solve the problem if we don't do it. The obvious factor that we're going to get breached is not real. Chances are, based upon statistics, a major breach will not happen at your organization. Breaches will happen, though. Let's not confuse that. Jim will get phished. Sally will give up her credentials. Tom will send out 5,000 emails before Microsoft shuts him off. Stuff's going to happen. Major ransomware attack, we lose all of our systems, very small. In fact, guys, I can break this down even further to you that the insurance companies that are all subsidiaries of Lloyd's and Lloyd's themselves state that if you have antivirus, you have log management, MFA, you use encryption, there's training and awareness, email security. If you have those 6 checkboxes and then a couple other things, you would qualify for my warranty service, which also means that Lloyd's will give you an 85% discount on your cyber insurance plan because you use our SOC services. Why? It's real simple. If you're doing all of that and you have this in place and you have somebody validating you're doing good asset management, the chances of you being up here having to explain that you really made a bad mistake as a leader significantly mitigated. So we have to paint these pictures better. The CEOs, the CFOs, they're sick of hearing the conversation of fear. They hate it. In fact, they're probably looking to replace you if that's how you approach it. Because they understand, too, that for every fear you have, I can buy insurance and insure it. Insurance is fear, right? Fear of being in a car accident. I buy insurance because if my car gets hit, I drive a nice car. God forbid they're uninsured. What if somebody gets injured? Right? So if we can shift the conversation, we can use data to support what we're looking at or what we're trying to accomplish from a delivery model, and we can have executive leadership sponsoring what we're doing as an executive. That's 4 legs, 6 legs, 8 legs, however big your board is, you have a much better chance of winning that conversation and, in the end, getting what you want. The urgency factor, this is always a good one. One of my biggest pet peeves, and when I started my organization 10 years ago, one of the number one things that we did, we were not a cybersecurity company right out of the gate. 2 months later we were, long story. But the component of what we originally went after was shelf life. Organizations spend lots of time negotiating deals. Well, your deal sucks if it stays on the shelf for 6 months. You might as well have paid MSRP and bought it day of. These are the things that we have to bring to the business. Look, we need to do this. It's going to take me 3 months to implement it. During that 3 months, we're going to be paying for the service. We're going to sink that cost. But once we get the service up, we get it deployed. 6 months later, I can eliminate 1 person on my staff. The technology has augmented a human. Now I can actually show to the organization that potentially I am saving us money. I bring back a conversation to 2016. Nick on my team, he was our SVP of IT and security at the time, and he brought me this tool. And I'm the CEO of 360 SOC, and he brought me this tool, and he said, this is going to change the game of the SOC. So, okay, cool. How much is this? It's my first question. He goes, well, it costs. I said, just how much? I just want to know how much. He goes, well, and at the time, this technology was called SOAR, and SOAR wasn't exactly the most expensive thing on the planet. I think it was, maybe like a $100,000 a year spend. I said, so $100,000 a year spend, pretty new company. I said, but what's this do for us? He says, it cuts out the people. All of a sudden, as a CEO, you got my attention. I'm a small company at the time. I'm not funded. I self-funded, still self-funded today. And you're telling me that if I spend $100,000 a year, it's going to save me 4 people. It's going to save me churn, employment churn. It's going to save me the responsibility necessarily to have to train the lowest level inside the SOC. In the end, it also potentially might be able to cover my back if I was outside the office doing something else. That technology was SOAR, Security Orchestration Automation Response Platform. SOAR gets a lot of heat nowadays, but at the time for me, it was an easy conversation. It's going to cost $100,000. It's going to save us $400,000. Wow. Where do I sign? If he would have brought it to me the opposite way and he's bringing me all this thing, it does these cool things like playbooks and, oh my gosh, like we got threat intelligence and we can track what people are doing. And if they assign something somewhere and then reassign it, we can see that. Who cares? It's good for IT. For me in the business, though, I don't care about that. I care about ROI, cost, and risk, right? I care about moving the organization forward, being able to implement quicker. My team did a really good job this year. We brought our implementation in an emergency down to less than 4 hours for a multi-thousand endpoint company. Significant when you're talking about integration stack, turning wrenches. But in a time of need, that becomes really important, especially in an IR. The ROI on investing and being able to do that faster makes a lot of sense. Having tools like Asana and other ways to track, to be able to sync teams together, whether they're working on the same shift or not, it brings a lot of value. So when we're having these conversations and we're trying to deliver the message internally and we're asking for money, ask for the money. Don't be shy. What is the worst thing somebody can tell you? Sound like a salesperson. No. Cool. See you in an hour. I'll come back and ask again. If it was your parents, you'd ask 10 times over the next 10 hours. Eventually, you might get the answer you want. Why are we not doing this in our business? If you need it that bad, get up there and ask for it. If you're getting denied for it, come back with a better plan. Maybe bring some more executives with you. Bring a model that makes sense. There's no point in duplicating technology because something's cooler this week than last week, though. So we've got to make sure that we're looking at that risk profile. There was some technology, I think Risklands or somebody like that back in the day. They were going down a path where literally you could take a technology, take your current ecosystem and makeup of your environment, and basically by doing X or adding X technology, it would show you whether your risk profile would move up or down. And you start looking at things like changes in firewalls, like bringing the next gen in versus having a stateful. Start look at the actual risk profile there of how much it moves. It's not as much as you think. Versus implementing something like MFA corporate-wide with an authenticator app, password policies, adhering to this stuff. It's going to have a different outcome. The outcome's going to be better. We've talked a lot here during this about building that consensus or building the want so that when you're having the conversation, you're keeping key on the audience, you're making sure you're not over-technically talking. You're breaking it down into human analogies. One of the best human analogies anyone in this room in IT can use is your home. I used to laugh because most people in this room have a home security system. That home security system's probably monitored, ADT. Few of you guys got Ring cameras. I mean, if you live in Phoenix, where I live, you got a Ring camera on every corner of your house. But a little different, but you might have cameras. Some people have actually like ADT, the drive-by service. They come check your house maybe only when you're out of town. Well, my question to most executives is, why are we not doing this in our business? If I got all this tech, all these ways to alert if somebody's going to rob my house, why do I have less technology in my business to tell me whether they're going to rob my business? lot of times it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So break this down into things they understand. House, kids, golf, football. You hear all these different kind of analogies. But I think that's the biggest thing is you find what they relate to and relate the conversation to them. The easiest one for most people, though, is your home. Because you can talk about, I want to sell a penetration test. Well, Mr. CEO goes, well, I don't even know what a penetration test is. Cool. It's where an external one, sir, would be when I come to your house and I check all your windows and doors to make sure they're locked. Oh, well, that makes sense. So you're going to do a walk around my house, you're going to check all the windows and doors, and you're going to hand me a report if you found anything weird. A lock maybe that's broken, a window that doesn't close all the way. Yeah. Well, that kind of makes sense. We should probably be doing that. It's a much easier conversation than trying to explain what a penetration test really is and how some guy's got to use all this methodology and he needs to be certified. And because he's certified, then he needs these tools, and this guy uses open source tools, and this guy's got paid tools. Right? This guy's got the next best widget. Who cares? So what you really want is somebody to go check your house and go check the windows and doors to make sure they're locked and give me in a report. Yes. What's that cost? Not a lot. It's a much easier conversation. Another thing that I find that I think is probably low-hanging fruit that people really miss out on is breaking this down to employee cost. How many people in this room, just quick raise of hands, know what your revenue to your employee is? How much revenue do you make in your organization per your employee? I encourage everybody in the room to go back and ask that question. How much do we make? Well, if we're making $1,000 per employee, and we know that ADT costs $55, and the next platform, our total employee costs, you got all these costs added together, there's still a lot of room there. I don't see why adding $1, $2, $4, $10 would make a lot of difference. People look at the price of the service we deliver being SOC as a service, and they look at it and go, wow, okay. Well, if you're 500 employees and you're spending, $5,500 a month, that's like $1,050. You're probably paying more for your email security than that, and these people are humans watching it 24/7 for you. The analogies, the understanding of the business, and also if you can get the data. And I also know that a lot of people would go ask that question in the room and say, what does this look like for us as an organization? What does this cost? You might hear a lot of people in the organization not know the cost. That's alarming a little bit. But if you went to the CFO, maybe he knows the cost or he can calculate the cost. But from there, once you have the calculated cost, understanding what the business does with that is the most important thing. Most people in the room probably won't get that visibility. So you got to partner internally with somebody. Partner with the CEO's right-hand man, COO, CFO. Tons of options there. Couple of case studies, just to kind of take away. I talked about Bob. I always like to use Bob. Bob's my good friend, and if it wasn't for Bob's company, our company wouldn't be where it is today. But Bob is a great example of the traditional IT or security executive who's worked his way up to become a CIO, but still has that traditional IT aspect to his approach. Bob always needs somebody with him when selling internally. If not, Bob's not going to sell it internally. Challenging those models is key. So when I'm in those conversations with Bob, as soon as we start going down the path, I try to think in my head of some type of way I can divert the conversation to get back on the goal of what we're looking to do and inevitably ask for the money. Extremely important. Especially if you're in organizations where revenue is not tied to cybersecurity, which is most. You'll have revenue in a way tied to it, but you're not being necessarily told because you're a fintech company with a platform and you're 50 employees and you're trying to sell to Wells Fargo, and Wells Fargo's telling you, we will not use your product unless you have all these controls. Well, you have a choice. Most people are not in that situation. But if you are, that makes obviously buying technology easier. The rest of us are asking for money. That money is coming out of probably revenue. So we got to make sure we tie as much as possible to the way the business traditionally has worked and try to help the business transform to the way we want it to work. The other thing is have data. There's nothing worse than when somebody on my team brings me something with no data to back it up. In fact, you can probably relate that, get out of the data conversation, it's like feedback. Cool, great, you provided me feedback. Do you have an example? Oh no, I don't have an example. Oh, you as an employer are now really disgruntled because you're like, wait a minute here, I'm getting told I did something wrong, but there's no feedback, and you have no example of how this even happened. Sounds like hearsay. So you want to shift that, right? You got to have good data. If we do this, we get here by this date. If we don't get to this date by this day, here's the path next. It can't always be, well, we got to add the next technology too. And I'll tell you, the IT vendors, and we do a terrible job a lot of times at explaining to customers what they're seeing versus what they get delivered. Every time you go see a demo, it's the cream of the crop. It's like when you bought Microsoft Dynamics for the first time and you go, wow, this looks nothing like what I saw on the demo. You know, Cisco UCS used to be like that too. Like, wow, that looks really good. Now it struggles. So the key takeaways from today's conversation, number 1 is don't be shy. Number 2 is bring the money up quick. 3, have data that supports that conversation significantly. The more data, the better. Make sure your data doesn't have a technical skew to it. Numbers are key. Guys, I really appreciate everybody's time today. This is a very interesting topic. It's something that I go back and forth on all the time of better ways to engage, better ways to help my peers engage, and I really thank everybody's time today. Thank you so much.